My name is Viriya Yoo, and my senior thesis is entitled The Ocean This Morning, Anthology as Incommensurable Intimacy in Troubling Borders. Troubling Borders is an anthology of art and literature by Southeast Asian women in the diaspora. The anthology attempts to cohere a new collective vision of Southeast Asia defined by those on the margins of an already minoritarian identity. This allows for a move away from the definition of Southeast Asia as rooted in Cold War imperial knowledge production. The political unevenness of Southeast Asia assures that the voices featured within the anthology are often at odds with one another. Disproportionately affected by processes of imperialism, the Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians have been historically dominant and thus overrepresented in studies of Southeast Asia. The anthology itself is no exception. The editors are all of Vietnamese descent, and they acknowledge that contributions by diasporic women from Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore are still rare, and works by women from stateless ethnicities such as the Hmong, Cham, and Mien, to name a few, are even rarer still. From here, I turn to Kay Wayne Yang and Eve Tuck's ethic of incommensurability to grapple with these uneven forms of subjugation. Incommensurability stands in contrast to reconciliation, which operates within settler colonial epistemological frameworks. Instead, this ethic recognizes that inquiries into dismantling settler colonial orders may never be fully realized. In this paper, I contend that liberal humanism is the founding condition which links Southeast Asian militarization to other global processes of imperialism and domination, including settler colonialism and racial capitalism. Lisa Lowe makes clear the connection between liberal philosophy and these forms of domination. But for time's sake, please feel free to pause the video here and learn more. Liberalism's impulse to order groups into categories of the human and non-human ultimately worked to justify imperial conquest, which includes the extraction of natural resources and human capital. All non-white others are rendered backwards and unfree, while in turn imperial conquest gets reframed as a civilizing mission. In the context of Southeast Asia specifically, the reframing of the war in Vietnam as a quote-unquote good war turns U.S. militarization in the region into a form of humanitarian rescue by way of liberal democracy. As asserted by Tuck and Yang, desires for decolonial solidarities must first grapple with uneven histories of subjugation. Although liberal humanism may link these processes, it is also important to note that no two forms of subjugation are identical or can be equivalized. Thus, in moving away from liberal forms of knowledge structured by narratives of progress, and therefore denial and erasure, it becomes crucial to develop modes of reading across colonial archives that emphasize relationality across difference. I therefore draw from Lisa Lowe's intimacy as heuristic, which is a methodology that destabilizes liberal processes of order. That colonial administrators saw a need to identify, define, and then establish boundaries between racialized subjects suggests that they perceived the sexual, laboring, and intellectual context between these subjects as dangerous. Intimacy as heuristic revalorizes these contexts instead, developing new modes of collective self-designation between similarly marginalized peoples. I contend that troubling borders can be viewed as a material embodiment of trans-Pacific intimacies with larger stakes for the scope of empire. Its multitudinal form refuses liberal processes of order and defies normative markers of linear progression. From here, I will offer close readings from poems which support this claim. The first is Yor Yang's Virgin Land, Virgin Body. In this poem, she links the coding of settler desires through sexually violent metaphors with the fetishization of Southeast Asian female sexuality. In the first line, she establishes a lineage between herself, her sisters, and the land as a shared mother, which mirrors colonial narratives of nation as mother. Her use of the verb penetrate to describe the nation-state's desire for conquest further reasserts the way that female sexuality is rhetorically integral to imperial ideology. However, the tone of this line underscores an awareness of the way that claiming the land the U.S. nation-state has settled is to adopt the weight of settler colonialism. Since Yang never makes clear that the sisters she references are also of Southeast Asian descent, This unspecificity allows for the possibility of affinity even beyond identitarian borders. Her simultaneous alignment with settlers and marginalized subjects demonstrates the need for incommensurability within coalitional politics. The second poem, Grace Kong's Miss Boz, highlights the tension between the structural isolation that accompanies racial capitalism's extraction of human capital, as well as a desire for community. As a Southeast Asian woman, Kong's spiritual, affective, and intellectual labor is continually devalued. Racialized bodies are primarily valued for their ability to physically labor, as Kong acknowledges through the line, "You can take my body." However, in the same line, she refuses the consumption of her mind by these oppressive structures. She stakes a claim over her intellectual property, defiantly proclaiming that it is her soul and thoughts that transcend time. Rather than writing to entertain an audience that seeks to consume her difference, she asserts that it is her difference, I'm Khmer, that necessitates her writing. To labor through writing is to radically reassert the wholeness of her being and recuperate what has been taken from her through capitalistic fetishization. As there is a permanence to writing that transcends space and time, the act of writing also gestures simultaneously to the full personhood of those who have come before her and will come after. It is a way to forge incommensurable intimacies. In the case of an anthology like Troubling Borders, the work submitted will inevitably speak to the need to archive the bodily. This ensures that the incommensurable debts carried by the Southeast Asian woman writer are never forgotten, and that future intimacies are always within reach. Further, to write about writing, especially within the already intimate anthological form itself, creates another form of intimacy. Cutting across organizational borders of the anthology opens up new readings of a Southeast Asian diasporic subjectivity, which fills that gap between theory and practice. Reading and writing lived experience ensures that alternative futures are realized out of the grievances and desires that inspire them. Finding meaningful similarities across lived experience, while holding space for specters of imperial violence, generates incommensurable intimacies that transcend space and time. Affinity is no longer defined by traditional identitarian borders of gender, sex, and ethnicity, but by shared visions of future world building.